Stunningly beautiful and dangerously shrewd, Diane de Poitiers was one of the most notorious figures of 16th century France, and for good reason. She held the heart of King Henry II firmly in her grasp, earned the bitter hatred of Queen Catherine de Medici, and navigated courtly scandal with the same finesse she used to navigate her lovers. But beneath the surface of her power and allure lay secrets far darker than anyone could have imagined. Born in January 1500 to an illustrious aristocratic family, Diane de Poitiers was destined for a life of privilege and power. She wanted for nothing and had close ties to the French throne, but her childhood wasn't as charmed as it seemed. Diane inherited her father Jean de Poitiers' razor-sharp intelligence and unrelenting ambition, qualities that were both assets and liabilities for a woman in her time. However, before Diane could wield these traits to her advantage, her family forced her into a devastating ordeal that would shape her forever. At just 15 years old, she was thrust into the high-stakes marriage market by her ambitious family, who sought an advantageous match to elevate their status. Their efforts paid off handsomely when Louis de Braise, the grandson of King Charles VII, set his sights on the young beauty. In 1515, Diane unwillingly walked down the aisle, and her family celebrated their coup of marrying her into a prestigious bloodline. But beneath the surface, the union was anything but joyous. Louis de Braise was nearly 40 years her senior, a stark contrast to Diane's youth and vitality. For the radiant teenager, marrying a man old enough to be her grandfather was less a dream and more a nightmare. While her family basked in the glow of their social triumph, Diane endured what must have felt like a gilded cage, and soon her frustration began to bubble over. Though she fulfilled her wifely duties by bearing her husband 2 children, she was renowned for her boundless energy and determination, and refused to conform to the sedentary expectations of women in her time. Diane became known for her athleticism, regularly engaging in horseback riding and swimming to maintain her toned, graceful figure, a striking contrast to the era's ideal of passive, ornamental femininity. Yet, even her active lifestyle couldn't insulate her from the storm brewing at home. In 1523, her husband Louis made a blunder so catastrophic it upended Diane's world. As a staunch loyalist to King Francis I, Louis discovered and exposed a plot against the crown. But in his zeal to serve the king, Louis overlooked a critical detail. Diane's father, Jean de Poitiers, was deeply implicated in the conspiracy. Louis had unknowingly delivered his father-in-law to the chopping block. The consequences were immediate and severe. Jean was sentenced to execution, leaving the de Poitiers family scrambling to save him. Diane, ever persuasive and resourceful, pleaded with King Francis for clemency. While she managed to spare her father's life, he still faced years of imprisonment, and his health never fully recovered from the ordeal. The betrayal left a bitter mark on Diane. Her marriage to Louis may have already felt like a gilded cage, but this act of treachery turned it into something much darker. However, Diane wasn't one to suffer silently. She found her own way to balance the scales, and she played the long game. When Diane de Poitiers met the young Prince Henry, she had no idea she was shaping her scandalous destiny. At the time, Diane was in her 20s, a sophisticated noblewoman known for her poise and beauty. Henry, on the other hand, was a mere 7-year-old boy, destined to become King of France, but at that moment, little more than a diplomatic pawn. In 1526, Henry was sent to Spain as a hostage, as part of his father, King Francis I's treaty with Charles V. On the day of his departure, Diane, then a lady-in-waiting to his grandmother, offered him a simple, ceremonial farewell kiss. This moment, innocent on its surface, would have consequences far beyond anyone's expectations. That kiss sparked something profound in young Henry. Isolated in Spain for 4 long years, he idealized Diane in his mind as the epitome of grace, femininity, and love. Without any close family around him, the image of Diane became a romanticized obsession. By the time Henry returned to France in 1531, his fascination had evolved into something much more dangerous. At the coronation of his new stepmother, Queen Eleanor of Austria, the entire French royal family wore the Queen's colours as a sign of loyalty and respect. Everyone, that is, except Prince Henry. Instead, the 12-year-old prince boldly wore Diane's colours, an open and scandalous display of affection for a woman twice his age. It may have seemed like a childish crush, but this was no fleeting infatuation. Diane's influence over Henry only grew stronger, and as he aged, the young prince's boyhood crush transformed into a full-blown adult obsession, one that would shock the court and enrage his queen. In 1531, Diane's husband died, and she revelled in her newfound freedom. Now a wealthy, independent widow, she had full control of her image, her finances, and most importantly, her access to court. With Prince Henry still hopelessly infatuated with her, Diane knew she had a golden opportunity. Her rebranding as a living embodiment of the Roman goddess Diana was nothing short of genius. By aligning herself with the chaste but powerful huntress, Diane cultivated a divine aura of strength and control. Her logo of interlocking crescents symbolized the waxing, waning, and full moon. Subtle, yes, but deeply symbolic for anyone paying attention. Her color scheme of black and white wasn't just elegant, it was also a masterstroke of courtly politics. Mourning colors made her look like a faithful widow, while the clever lunar reference reinforced her goddess image. But Diane was far from the chaste goddess she styled herself as. While she played the role of a dutiful widow, she was carefully orchestrating her rise to power. She masterfully walked the line between unattainable goddess and just-out-of-reach lover. Prince Henry, now a teenager, was utterly bewitched. But Diane was a strategist, not a fool. She didn't rush into his arms. Instead, she made him chase her, knowing that desire is strongest when it's unfulfilled. Her patience eventually paid off, and soon, Diane de Poitiers wasn't just Henry's unattainable dream woman, she became his obsession. And it wasn't long before she would become his official mistress, and that's where the real scandal began. But before she could seize full control, she faced a major obstacle that could have destroyed her plans. Henry was about to get married. In 1533, the French court arranged for Henry, then 14, to marry, but for Diane. This was a nightmare. Catherine was young, politically savvy, and, unlike Diane, she had a legal claim on Henry's attention. Diane was just a mistress. Realizing this, most women would have backed off, but Diane was not most women. Rather than retreat, she doubled down. Diane knew that Catherine had one fatal weakness. She wasn't French. To many at court, Catherine was seen as a foreign interloper, while Diane had French blood, noble roots, and a decades-long reputation for elegance, intelligence, and charm. So instead of treating Catherine like a rival, Diane treated her like a pawn. On Henry and Catherine's wedding day, Diane positioned herself as the wise older woman Henry could always rely on. She stood by his side, whispered advice in his ear, and became his most trusted confidant. In a shocking twist, Catherine had to accept it. She had no choice. Diane had already captured Henry's heart and mind, and Catherine, desperate to secure her place as queen, played nice, at least for now. But the next phase of Diane's plot was her boldest move yet. She didn't just aim to be Henry's mistress, she aimed to be the true Queen of France. Just months after Henry's marriage to Catherine de Medici, Diane committed an act that has gone down in infamy. At 35 years old, many historians believe Diane bedded the now 15-year-old Henry herself, finally giving the princeling what he had wanted for so long. After years of machinations and playing the long game, Diane de Poitiers was officially a royal mistress. Poor Catherine de Medici was wild with jealousy when she heard that her husband was sleeping with his much older crush, causing a lot of drama for Diane. Still, Diane knew exactly what to do. She positioned herself as, if not Catherine's friend, then at least an experienced advisor, to help her learn the ropes of the new court, and Diane's biggest piece of advice was quite the doozy. You see, with no heir after nearly a decade of marriage, Catherine de Medici was panicking, and Diane de Poitiers knew exactly how to exploit the situation. Though she was Henry's mistress, Diane didn't want Catherine to be replaced. If Catherine was set aside for a new, fertile wife, Diane's influence would be at risk. So instead of fanning the flames of jealousy, Diane played the role of the wise elder woman and offered Catherine help. But Diane's help was as bizarre as it was strategic. She encouraged Catherine to try a range of medieval fertility treatments, many of which sound like something straight out of a witch's spellbook. Among the most infamous was her suggestion that Catherine drink mule urine, yes, mule urine, as part of a fertility ritual. The logic behind this grotesque idea is lost to history, but it was part of a larger pattern of fertility remedies, common at the time, including bizarre diets, charms, and even magical amulets. It might sound like Diane was just trolling Catherine, but it was actually a genius move. By portraying herself as a helpful advisor, Diane secured a powerful position at court. Instead of being seen as a rival mistress, she became someone Catherine was forced to depend on. Even as Catherine seethed with jealousy, she had to accept Diane's guidance. This was a masterclass in manipulation. But that wasn't the only strategy Diane had up her sleeve. Since Henry was clearly more infatuated with Diane than Catherine, Diane made sure to control his time, attention, and even his royal duties. As Henry's closest confidant, she didn't just influence his romantic life, she influenced his political decisions too. Diane controlled who could see Henry, who could petition him, and which matters were brought to his attention. In many ways, Diane was a shadow queen, wielding more influence than Catherine ever could. Still, Diane knew that a mistress's power was only as strong as her ability to maintain the king's favour. And, in one of her most jaw-dropping acts of control, Diane ordered that all official documents signed by King Henry II also bear her personal emblem, the three interlocking crescents of her goddess motif. In some instances, even the royal seal included Diane's symbol next to the king's. This was a power move that sent a message to everyone at court. Diane was untouchable, but Diane's luck couldn't last forever. Catherine de Medici wasn't going down without a fight, and as soon as fate handed Catherine the upper hand, she made sure Diane paid dearly. Throughout these years, Diane and Henry were still at it like rabbits together, age gap be darned. In fact, Henry was so glued to her side, Diane had to start insisting that he go to Catherine and his marriage bed more frequently, in the hopes that he could finally get a legitimate heir. According to one story, Catherine de Medici was so desperate to get with child, she drilled holes in the floorboard above Diane's bedchambers, all so she could spy on how her husband and his mistress got it on and make certain that she was doing everything, properly. Bizarrely enough, it worked. In 1543, it became clear that Catherine was pregnant at long last. And in January 1544, she gave birth to a coveted boy, Francis. But it seemed like Diane had done her job a little too well, though, because incredibly, 9 other children followed in short succession, with Catherine pretty much constantly pregnant for over a decade afterward. But if Catherine thought this meant she'd gotten rid of Diane de Poitiers, she was dead wrong. With Catherine's fertility issues finally resolved, Henry decided to prove his undying devotion to Diane with a truly unhinged display of loyalty. In 1544, Diane found herself in serious trouble. A rival at court accused her of conspiring against King Francis I, Henry's father. Furious with Diane, King Francis banished her from Paris, believing he'd finally put an end to her influence over his son. But Henry's reaction was nothing short of deranged. Instead of accepting his father's decision, Henry threw a monumental tantrum. He packed up his entourage and left court entirely, moving straight into Diane's new residence to be with her. As if that wasn't extreme enough, Henry also gave his father the royal cold shoulder, refusing to speak to him for an entire year. Incredibly, even this wild show of devotion wasn't enough for Diane. She still wanted more, and, as always, she knew exactly how to get it. In 1547, Diane finally got what she always wanted. That year, Henry's father passed, making her boy toy the King of France. And the minute he took the reins, Henry swooped Diane back up into the court's inner circle and banished many of the enemies who had exiled her before. Diane de Poitiers was on top of the world, which meant there was nowhere to go but down. As Diane solidified her role as chief mistress to the King of France, she embraced the position with ease and precision. And while King Henry showered Diane with unprecedented political influence, he simultaneously kept his wife, Catherine de Medici, completely shut out of court affairs. For a time, Catherine tolerated this humiliation, until Henry crossed a line that was simply too much to bear. In a move as bold as it was insulting, Henry gifted Diane the magnificent Château de Chenonceau, a palace Catherine had secretly coveted for herself. To make matters worse, Diane wasted no time flaunting her new prize. She moved in immediately, transforming it into a hub of opulence and excess, hosting grand star-studded soirees that served as little more than a public taunt to Catherine. With each lavish party, Diane's message was clear. She was the true queen of Henry's heart, and perhaps his kingdom as well. To Catherine, this was the final straw. The gloves were now off, and it would be Diane's doom. In public, Catherine de Medici played the role of the composed queen, but behind closed doors, her true feelings were far darker. Bitterness festered in her heart as she watched Diane continue to command Henry's love and attention. Then again, Catherine still had youth on her side, while Diane was now approaching her 60s at a rapid pace. So, how did she still maintain her hold over Henry? The answer to that is simply terrifying. Many attributed Diane's beauty to good genes, but whispers around court suggested a more disturbing secret. According to chilling rumours, Diane wasn't just relying on nature's gifts. She was said to be drinking liquid gold in a desperate bid to preserve her youthful appearance. Whether out of vanity or fear of losing her hold on Henry, Diane embraced this bizarre ritual. But as she approached her 60th birthday, however, fate delivered a devastating blow that would alter the course of her life forever. In 1559, she attended a grand jousting tournament, eager to watch her lover assert his dominance over the men of his court. As always, Henry flaunted his devotion to Diane by wearing her signature black and white colours instead of the hues of his wife, Catherine de Medici's house. It was a brazen display of favouritism, but on this day, fate had other plans. As Diane watched from the stands, the unthinkable happened. King Henry faced off against the young and inexperienced Count of Montgomery. In their first run, Montgomery nearly unseated the king, a move that bruised Henry's ego. Determined to reclaim his honour, the king demanded a rematch. It was a fatal mistake. On the next pass, disaster struck. Montgomery's lance shattered on impact, and a jagged splinter shot straight into Henry's face. Blood poured from the king's eye as shards of the lance lodged deep into his skull. The sight was so grisly that even the hardened Diane, along with Catherine de Medici and her son Prince Francis, fainted on the spot. But for Diane, the horror was only just beginning. The once powerful mistress, so used to being untouchable, was about to watch her world fall apart in the most brutal way possible. In July, months after the jousting incident, Henry's health and mental state went into a decline, and he gradually lost everything: his sight, his sanity, and then his life on July 10th. Diane's constant companion had passed at the age of 40, and her rival, Catherine de Medici, was now the powerful Queen Mother to Henry's young, legitimate son, Prince Francis. It couldn't have gone worse for Diane. Queen Catherine de Medici was in full-on vengeance mode, and she set her sights squarely on Diane. She not only forced the former mistress to give back those coveted crown jewels, but she also yanked back Diane's beautiful Château de Chenonceau. Then Catherine amped it right up. As King Henry II lay dying, he repeatedly called out for Diane, desperate to see his beloved one last time. But Catherine's response was nothing short of ruthless. Consumed by bitterness, Catherine coldly refused to allow Diane anywhere near Henry's deathbed. The star-crossed lovers were denied a final farewell, and Diane was forced to grieve from afar. But Catherine's cruelty didn't end there. In a final act of spite, she barred Diane from attending Henry's funeral, ensuring that the king's most devoted companion was excluded from his last rites. It was a calculated, heartless move that cemented Catherine's victory in their long-standing feud. After King Henry II's death, Diane de Poitiers' reign as France's most powerful mistress came to an end. Banished from court, she retreated to her chateau in Annette, forced to watch from the sidelines as her longtime rival, Catherine de Medici, seized control of France's affairs. But fate had one more cruel twist in store for Diane. In 1565, at the age of 64, Diane's love for horse riding led to her downfall. Despite her age, she insisted on riding with the energy of a much younger woman. But, like Henry's stubbornness during his fatal jousting match, Diane's refusal to slow down proved deadly. She fell from her horse, suffering severe injuries from which she never fully recovered. Weakened and broken, Diane passed away a year later, just as Catherine de Medici was at the peak of her power. But even in death, Diane faced one last humiliation. Her legacy, once marked by beauty, influence, and scandal, was overshadowed by her rival's dominance, and her end was a grim reflection of the man she had loved and lost. Hundreds of years after she died, her enemies got one final blow in. During the French Revolution, the citizens opened up Diane's tomb, desecrated her remains, and then threw them in a mass grave along with other aristocrats of France's bygone age.